If there is no pressure, your brain suddenly stops working. You know the task matters. You want to do it. You think about it constantly, but somehow you still can't start. Then suddenly the deadline gets close and now your brain activates. You clean the house at midnight, write reports in 2 hours, finish work at the last second, suddenly become hyper-focused, and afterward you think, why am I like this? I'm Ibrahim, a licensed nurse practitioner and registered psychotherapist, and this is one of the most common patterns I see in adults with ADHD and executive dysfunction. And no, this is not simply laziness. That distinction is really important because lazy people generally don't spend the entire day feeling guilty about what they are avoiding. Many ADHD adults are actually mentally overwhelmed the entire time. What's happening is that the brain often struggles with activation, especially for low stimulation tasks, and urgency artificially creates stimulation. That's why deadlines become fuel, panic becomes fuel, pressure becomes fuel. Over time, people unknowingly train themselves to function almost entirely through stress activation. This is where people misunderstand ADHD. The brain is not responding to importance, it's responding to stimulation, and urgency creates stimulation very quick. This is why some adults can perform incredibly well in emergencies but struggle with routine tasks. It's also why intelligent people often get missed, because from the outside people say, well, you can do it, and technically that's true, but they often can only do it under very specific neurological conditions: panic, novelty, urgency, fear, or extreme interest. That's very different from consistent executive functioning. One of the biggest signs I see is people saying, I only become productive when things get serious, or I wait until the pressure becomes unbearable, or I can't start until it feels urgent. And this creates enormous shame over time because people start believing, I must be lazy, I must lack discipline, I must not care enough. Meanwhile, many of them are actually operating in chronic nervous system stress. And eventually this becomes exhausting because your brain was never meant to live in permanent deadline mode. Here is the part nobody talks about. Many adults with ADHD become addicted to urgency without realizing it, not emotionally addicted, neurologically dependent on it for activation. That's why calm structure often feels strangely difficult, and this is also why routines fail for many ADHD adults. People create routines during motivation spikes, but often novelty disappears, the stimulation drops, and brain stops activating constantly again. Then they blame themselves again. This cycle repeats for years, and over time it affects work, relationships, self-esteem, health, sleep, everything. Some adults become very successful despite this pattern, but internally they're exhausted from constantly forcing activation, and eventually the system starts breaking down. Now, to be clear, not everybody who procrastinates has ADHD, but if this pattern has existed since childhood, if you repeatedly function only through urgency, if structure keeps collapsing despite effort, it may be worth exploring more deeply. Because understanding the patterns changes how you approach treatment, work, organization, and even self-perception. Sometimes people spend years attacking themselves, for a neurological pattern they never understood properly. And honestly, getting proper clarity can remove a huge amount of shame. At clarity.crocuscare.ca, we assess these kinds of functional patterns in a structured way because they're often much more happening beneath the surface than people realize. And for many adults, finally understanding why their brain works this way becomes the beginning of real change.